Wait. Just say that again. The pros were what? Just in case it's worth
the
keeping.
prose. I mean, it serves like the narrative and like the philosophy, but like the prose was pretty weak at times. It was like, and then I stopped. I could not think of something to do, and or like he did stop talking after that. Curious. It's like a lot of like really like basic observation, which like, but I listened to the audio instead of rereading it. Like I listened to the audiobook twice, and I think that kind of like emphasized the like weak, like the low basic prose a little bit for me.
That's interesting.
The narrator just be like very frequently like, I was feeling very warm. The sun was beating on me. I felt warm. Like I started moving forward. It's
Indeed,
like
I felt warm.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's which reading through you can kind of blitz past that, but listening to it's like you're forced to listen to whatever pace the narrator gives.
Well,
yeah, that's fair at least. I mean, like it's true. Like whenever you do read that, like that wasn't an issue for me reading it.
Yeah, I don't think it was an issue. It was just like an observation that like, especially because I listened to the audiobook twice, I could almost like anticipate what was going to be coming. So it was just like, all right, here we go. 15 seconds for the guy to say he's warm,
Yeah,
I mean, very on the micro scale.
I mean, it's definitely. I mean, I don't know if you like listen to the introduction, but like in the introduction, like they talk about how like Camus intentionally chose this terse style of writing, aptly named the American style of writing. Just after it's just like there are like a lot of American protagonists that have sort of this internal dialogue where statements are made terse on the page. So
yeah, there was a lot of that.
I liked it. I mean,
I didn't dislike it. It was just an observation that I had that like I think because I listened to the audiobook twice, it's just like all these comments were just like more slowly made than I would have read it, and then twice over.
I wonder because I very much enjoyed the writing style, but I also just read it. And I also read it in, I don't know, like, because we have different versions or whatever, but mine, I think we have different versions, right?
What's the cover of yours look like?
It looks like this. It's the translation is by Matthew Ward.
Let me see in the back here.
And mine is.
What does your cover look like, Adam?
Mine's 123 pages.
So mine's also by Matthew Ward. But here's the cover.
That's the one that I have as well. I'm not 100% sure if I listened to the audio for that.
I think actually those are the same book. I think it's just like a different.
I think you said you did look through that, right? No, you looked through. It was Jacques the Fatalist and his master. Okay, never mind. Yeah,
but when I was ordering this, that cover came up, and it seems to be the same. It's just like the same book, different editions or whatever. So,
I'm sure it should be fine.
Good translation, by the way. I thought it was. I thought it was a really good translation.
I listened to the Ward translation. I just double checked the video I watched.
It was good.
We're all on the same page.
This was good. It was a book where I would sit down to read for like, I was just like, oh, okay, I'll read for the next, because there were, I think, two main parts, but then there were like chapters within the two main parts.
Yeah.
I would sit down and be like, okay, I'll just like read a chapter right now. I've got like 10 minutes or whatever.
Yeah.
And then I would just continue reading for like several more chapters because it's just like it's very readable. Like,
it's very, for sure.
Yeah.
I like the structure so much more than Nausea, where it's just like random days, some of which last like 40 pages, some of which last like,
some days were one line.
Yeah, no, there was one that's like, I don't exist today.
Nothing happened, or one was like anything could happen. I think that was like a Tuesday. It was like Tuesday, anything could happen.
Yeah, this made it much. I mean, I listened to it, but still, like it really helps, kind of pace.
Yeah.
So not a huge fan of like the diary entry style literature. I mean, maybe someone could give me an example of something I've read where I've enjoyed it, but I've come across it a few times now, and it's never been my favorite style of literature.
I can imagine it being good, but yeah, I agree. I haven't read anything where it kind of serves a greater purpose and emphasizes or it heightens my enjoyment.
No, I like when things are kind of wrapped up neatly in a chapter. It's even if like one chapter bleeds into the next, it's like you can refer to a single chapter. Like I don't know.
Just for reference for discussion alone is enough to justify it for me. I mean, I do think it might have served the purpose of Nausea to like make it confusing in that way. Like the pacing was just way off. Like that might have been part of the intention. But regardless, I much prefer chapters to reference.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say, um, I have a prediction for this discussion. I feel like we're gonna end this discussion and basically repeat the same. I don't want to call it a mistake because, like, who knows what would have happened otherwise. But you know how we read Nausea and then we circled back around to like an actual kind of like more explicitly philosophical work by Sartre. I kind of feel like I would benefit from circling back around and doing the same for Camus and returning to, because I've read The Myth of Sisyphus, but neither of you have, right?
Is that a paper?
It's a book.
It's a book, but I believe I don't remember the actual style of the book. It like the title of it is The Myth of Sisyphus and Other Essays. But I don't recall, to be honest, because when I originally read it, I read it as an audiobook. So I don't know how it's actually physically laid out. But I kind of excuse me. I like because I knew a tiny bit more about Camus. Like before reading The Stranger. So it kind of made me realize, oh, I almost want to like return to his more explicitly philosophical works after this in the same way that we did for Sartre.
Fine by me. How long is The Myth?
So it's 212 pages, but it could be, if I don't remember exactly how it's laid out, it could be the case that like one kind of section of that it is like kind of like the main
essay,
the main entree of the philosophical treatise there.
Yeah. So actually, hold on, I might have actually accidentally started listening to the audiobook for that. Does that like start with suicide conversation?
Yes, it does. He
I accidentally, I think the YouTube video immediately recommended to me after I finished The Stranger, The Myth of Sisyphus. So
it makes sense.
Actually, that's doable. It's a little bit bulkier than The Stranger, but I think it's doable.
Yeah, your ears are up for the task.
Give me strength.
Well, I mean, commutes have to be just golden for that. I mean, that's like pristine listening time, in my opinion. Because, like, I don't know, if you're like on a commute, you never have to focus that much on what's going on to the point where it's like very entertaining. You can kind of get like wrapped up in the audiobook.
Oh yeah, no, 100%. Like I was doing it while I was working, and it was simple to follow.
Many vials were contaminated.
Don't tell my boss. But no, I mean, it was easy to follow, and like the more simple prose, like the American style, as Adam called it, actually helps the audio format. If you're not like hyper focused on it, because like it also wasn't like like a paper in that like it would be torturous to like listen to like a philosophical paper. I feel like I couldn't track that in my head.
That sounds like honestly torture.
So is my question there then is like, is the Myth of Sisyphus much more oriented towards like a paper reading?
I believe so. Yeah.
Okay. I started reading it and it's dense.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's just good to know. I don't want to be the rate limiting step, so I'll make informed decisions.
I think we would have to order because I wouldn't want to listen to an audiobook version because I already did that. So I would want to reread it. So we might not actually do it next.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah.
Well, it could arrive in 4 days. Okay, we'll discuss this after.
Okay, no way. Not a chance we get it on Friday and I'm having it read.
The ears can't handle such abuse.
They cannot.
Okay, so for better listening content, we're talking about we should say The Stranger by Albert Camus. And yeah, I think we've kind of like basically said our remarks about it. Generally speaking, I thought the experience of reading this was more positive. I had more generally positive affect reading this than I did Nausea.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And also, I mean, okay, it's like a very simple story. But I found myself at times sort of like, I think I was like, physically making that kind of aghast like face while I was like, what? Just like I was kind of baffled at his course of action. I was baffled at other people's courses of action and thoughts. It was kind of an interesting novella in that sense.
Yeah, definitely. I also think we dive more into like the psychology of the character as simple as the story is.
Yeah.
So I definitely want to kind of figure out collectively here, why did Camus make Meursault the way that he is? Like what is that, what is the purpose of that? What is he trying to, demonstrate with that?
Yeah.
So
yeah, in the same way that we sort of hypothesized, and then I feel like got our questions answered with Sartre's The Strain or Nausea, like Antoine in that.
Yeah. It's interesting that like three of the major works that we've done here all involve kind of the psychology of like a edge of society man,
Yeah, well, so I was gonna say, like, we can start to talk about it. I saw, like, I didn't think that this character paralleled Antoine from Nausea and then the Underground Man exactly, but I did notice a few. I noticed like a few kind of parallels.
Yeah, I think there's one big one. This guy doesn't seem very intelligent.
This guy doesn't seem very intelligent. He didn't seem like overtly stupid though. What do you mean by that?
I just got the impression that he was kind of just casually, like he was observant to some extent, but he kind of was just like casually floating. He never, all of his comments were simple, like we were talking about the prose. I don't know. I just didn't get like, especially whenever you compare it to like the Underground Man, who was like making these kind of like deep cuts at his own expense and like other like observations that were, I don't know, more insightful. It seemed like we're supposed to kind of read about this character. I don't know. Did you feel like he was intelligent? Because I really just didn't get that vibe. Again, not an idiot, but just like not as intelligent as I at least read into the Underground Man.
Yeah, I kind of get what you're saying a little bit, in the sense that he's certainly not a character of the mind. Like he is very like sensuous in the sense that like it's all about, like the effect his surroundings and much of how stimulus plays a role in his thinking and his experience, rather than, conceptions of reality that kind of rattle around in his head that we're kind of analyzing there. It's more about, he's constantly, like, as you said, observing, how the light makes him feel. Like he's noticing coldness and warmth. He also seems, he constantly, like, it's a constant refrain of his that he's tired, or, that he would rather be in a more comfortable position. It's always like his kind of immediate physical desires are always very present, if you know what I'm saying.
It feels like that's all that's rattling around in there, though, to be honest, like most of the time.
Yeah, a good bit of the time.
So that's why I guess that is basically informs my impression that he wasn't too intelligent. Again, not like an idiot, but just like we don't get, like a lot of like angst from overthinking that we got from the previous characters.
I agree with that.
Much less analytical. Just kind of like, I observe that I am warm, like that's like a lot of his dialogue, to be honest.
I actually agree with that. I actually don't think it's like we'd have to parse that word analytical, but I would agree. I would say he's observant, but not analytical.
Yeah, I think both of the previous characters were analytical.
And I guess it's also like, for this character specifically, it's hard to tell. I guess I'm sort of thinking about like, it's almost hard to tell how analytical he could be, because it seems like a lot of his, he almost, he's lacking in reaction to many things in a lot of ways. So like, kind of the book opens up with his mother dying, and he's very,
he doesn't even know if it was like yesterday or not, for sure.
Yeah, so he doesn't even know, like, because he has to go. He lives in France in some smaller town.
He lives in Algeria.
Oh, he does?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And then he has to go to like somewhere else in Algeria. So it's around Algiers.
Yeah, because he was offered a job in Paris. That's why I was. That's
true.
Why I thought that. Yeah. So he lives in Algeria. But it said it was in like a kind of a smaller town, but he had to go to like this very rural area, to bury his mother, and he had put her in a home, and it was like it was almost hard to tell for me if he was not intelligent or analytical, versus almost sort of like didn't have a lot of strong feelings about many things in general, but yet kind of like you could imagine someone who has this like great potential for analytical thought, but who doesn't react strongly to a lot of things, and so it doesn't kind of like get off the ground. You know,
I get what you're saying, but I'm very much invoking Sartre in the if he doesn't do it, then he's not.
no, of course, of course. I'm not claiming that
I see what you're
like
saying. Yeah,
secret
I don't think we can crucify him as like a moron, but like I don't know. For the other characters, it would seem like if he was like experiencing indifference, they would kind of like observe and then discuss that and like feel angst about it, or like feel unfortunate that he feels that way. But for him, it's just that's it.
I agree with Giffen. I think much of the trial kind of just demonstrated that. I mean, for example, like when Marie took the stand, right? I mean, it's like what were the things that were put on the page? Okay, it was her figure, it was the color of her skin, the fact that her beauty, he wanted her physically in that moment, but there wasn't much emotion, and it's like, okay, fine, he's not an emotional guy. Okay, what were the implications of her being on that stand? Well, there weren't a lot there either rattling around. So it's like, I don't know. So I kind of agree
the social element is like almost absent, like almost entirely, like in his thinking.
Yeah, and he's obviously not a fool, but maybe just like maybe more of a shallow guy would be a better way to say it. Like he's very surface level approach to life. So
yeah. I mean, if you kind of like pull out like the general conception of intelligence into like the different parameters, like I think this socially he's like a 0, but like everything else is probably like normal-ish, right? Like he didn't even seem to understand. There are a few instances where he like can understand other people are experiencing something, but like even then it's a tenuous grasp on that, and like a lot of the times it's like I don't know, you feel like there's a lot of like high stakes situations, and he's just like, what you get from him is like he stopped talking for a moment, or then he like the epiphanies are like, it would be quite awkward to ask that question, and that's it, like whenever I think this was when the lawyer, his lawyer was like asking him like if he felt sad his mother died or something like that, and he's like the lawyer was like, I understand that, like I feel very uncomfortable, but I need to ask this, and then like the only thing you get from him is like, oh, that would be uncomfortable to ask. Like that is like the depth we get in like interpersonally. That is I think the peak.
Or here's another one that's I think even more damning. Okay, so when the chaplain comes to meet with him at the end of the book.
Oh, at the very end, yeah.
At the very end, I take him at his word that he's genuinely uninterested about the concept of an afterlife or a god, right? So it's not as though he's adamantly doesn't believe in a god in the sense that here are my reasons why. It's ultimately to him it's not that he. I actually do want to get into some of that text because he does give reasons, but I also believe he is uninterested in that question. So he says he is, and I believe him. So
I think that's fair.
Well, and just like one last thing, adding to like Giffen, your comment about his social intelligence being essentially 0. He this was in the beginning, but he has
Marie.
No,
Oh,
he had several instances where I was very almost it took me out of the book for a second, where he was projecting onto people kind of these like accusations or demands for an explanation from him from things that you would not actually like think that they were doing that. Like when he says he told his boss that he would need 2 days off to go see his mother, he said and I felt very defensive that I should explain to him precisely why the nature of it was set up such to create myself a 4-day weekend. And it was like your boss probably isn't actually thinking about that.
But I think it kind of goes back to, once again, just these visceral responses on his part where he might have actually sensed the annoyance. like he says that he thought the boss was sort of annoyed. So in that moment, he reacted to say, it's not my fault, right? It's not my fault. And so it's like, he really is almost like this carnal figure that is like, reacting in the moment how he sees fit. I mean, I hate to kind of keep jumping around, but this one just popped into my mind as well. But his relationship with Raymond, right? Where it's like, Raymond is this deplorable figure, very unlikable.
Yes.
When you read of him, I mean, just for the listeners' background, Raymond.
We should do a quick plot discussion.
Yeah, sure,
but characters, but
Raymond lives in his apartment complex, and he ultimately was like hitting his girlfriend or his quote unquote mistress in this case, because he thinks that she's been cheating on him, and he's found certain things that make him believe that. So, like, I think I recall that Mersault like witnesses at least like some of like the beatings, and then goes over and like ultimately has like dinner with the guy, or lunch or dinner, and he's like, "You're my pal, right?" And Mersault's like, "Yeah, like I am your."
He sort
pal.
of like acquiesces to it. He doesn't try to be pals with him, but he's fine to be pals.
He's like, I cannot think of a reason not to be a pal, and that suffices to kind of just continuing the engagement.
It's very strange.
But it kind of goes back to the point I was driving at, which is he seems like, once again, it's like in the moment, like what will provide him like the greatest sort of like joy and pleasure in the moment. Well, it's just being friends with the guy. He just acquiesces to the friendship, as you said. Like, yeah, sure, we're pals. Do you want to go to the beach? Yeah, sure, I'd love to go to the beach. It's just like he just kind of
water would be nice.
Yeah,
it would feel nice on my skin.
Exactly. He's just kind of like a go with the flow, character. So.
Yeah.
So do we want to go over like the arcs of this plot?
Yeah. So basically, like, I mean, Adam began it when saying that. So okay, so like, I mean, the plot itself is fairly short. He's kind of you're kind of dropped into his life in a very you don't know a lot about his background or anything. I mean, he's essentially nothing really. And he basically, I mean, he just kind of very out of nowhere begins this relationship with someone who he had kind of desired, this woman from his office, and they no longer work together or whatever, but he just kind of like comes into random contact with her and they begin this romantic entanglement.
The day after his mother died.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. That's where we really start.
No, that's true. Yeah. Yeah. And, their relationship kind of progresses in an odd way where you don't get the sense that, I don't know, at least I didn't like, did you guys get the sense that they were sort of like, emotionally intimate? I mean, because they were obviously like, they were obviously physically intimate, but there was no like,
I think so here's the thing. I think Marie, like, there were emotions being like coming from one end, but not the other. They were not reciprocated, right? Because Mersault is just incapable. Because twice Marie asks, like, "Do you love me?" And he says, "I do not think I do."
Well, but he also says he's like, "I don't think this means much, but I don't think I do."
Yeah, no, that's right. He says, like, it's like, I don't value this statement, but no.
Yeah,
he's like, don't make a big deal out of this, but no.
And then like curiously, whenever she's like, "Will you marry me?" Like, or like, "Would you?" He's like, "I can't think of a reason why not." It's like the social relationship is like, there's a huge gap there, and he just does not even perceive like that there's supposed to be some sort of emotional prerequisite to like the engagement.
Yeah.
And Marie's confused as hell.
Yeah, but I mean, it almost reflects poorly on her too, because she's just like, "We'll get married then." It's like, okay, this man clearly does not, kind of desire to get married, to you in like the way that I don't know. Okay, just pretend that you had like, a friend who was a girl, and then she tells you that story. I would be like, There'd be like there'd be like serious points of concern.
Enormous red flags being waved. Yeah.
I mean, I know this is, before our time, obviously, but I mean, you know what I mean? Like,
you need to sit her down and explain. Like,
yeah, I'd just be like, I don't know. I'd be like, as a man myself, like that is not the set of emotions that I would expect myself to feel. Like if I were, yeah. So, but so their relationship is kind of ramping up, and Raymond, as you mentioned, Adam, he invites him to go to the beach. He has this friend who has a beach house.
Raymond has a friend.
Yes, Raymond has a friend who has a beach house. And as they're leaving to go to the beach, Raymond has seen these, the book refers to them as Arabs, who...
Yeah, right. Because we're in Africa, right? We're in Algeria. So
yes.
One of the Arabs is the brother of the girl that Raymond was beating.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes,
that's the connection there.
Yes, and he has seen them kind of following him multiple times, but they've never engaged with him, it seems like. And so they see Raymond and Marcel and Marie getting on the bus to go to the beach, and later, while on the beach, there were two Arabs, the woman's brother and just his friend, I would assume. And Raymond kind of says like, I'll take the brother, he's my man, and he just kind of knocks him out cold very quickly. And I think is it Marcel who it's the other friend. Yeah, it's the friend.
Is it Mason?
It was something like that. Yeah. Masson or something.
Masson.
Yeah.
Something like that. I don't know.
I didn't know what. Yeah. But he kind of attacks the other one. And they've like physically bested both of them, but then the one brandishes a knife, and everyone kind of separates, and the Arabs back away, and just
Ramon gets cut.
Yeah, Ramon gets cut pretty badly. Yeah, and he.
Wait, so it's Ramon instead of Raymond. I anglicized every single name.
Oh yeah, I listened to the audiobook and it was like some French pronunciation, so I kind of just.
So Ramon.
Yeah, let's go with Ramon then.
Raymond.
Yeah,
I wasn't gonna say anything because they're like easy to.
I anglicized every single one. Mersault.
So it's
Raymond,
Merceau, Ramon, and then what's the last? I forget like the friend's name. He kind of just disappears at a certain point.
Mason. What is it?
It doesn't even matter.
Masson.
Yeah.
Close enough. Mason will work, honestly. I don't know.
Mason.
Yeah, well,
he's kind of like a minor character.
He does not matter. And so basically, after Ramon is healed, Ramon goes and gets his gun, and essentially goes back to the beach, and he's going to just shoot the Arabs in cold blood, essentially, because they're both just like they were beaten up themselves, and so they're kind of just like kind of tending to their own wounds in a way, I guess, like relaxing in this like cave-ish sort of a thing. It's like a
rocky outcrop or something.
Yeah, it was basically just sort of like a place of shelter, I guess, on the beach, like created by the rock outcropping. And Marceau, Marceau says, no, that would kind of be like dishonorable to do, essentially.
I'll take the gun. He takes the gun from him, and this is a moment which like it's like, oh, this guy is actually maybe has social capacity, like he understands the situation, right?
Yeah.
But then like he has a blip of like a 3 social intelligence, and then
well, I mean he says something along the lines of, okay, don't shoot unless they brandish the knife first. That's what he says.
Yes.
So he recognizes that, okay, we shouldn't attempt to kill unless they threaten violence here. So
yeah.
But it also seems like they're kind of seeking it at this point, right? Like that's kind of the situation. They're kind of like meandering back to where they will likely find them.
It's totally on them. I mean, Ramon goes and gets like he intended to obviously kill both of them in cold blood. So
he was very upset when the friend and Merceau attempts to follow him. remember like his
Yes.
frustration at
Yeah.
he's like, okay, yeah, we'll go back out to the beach with you. And he just very angrily turns around, because he intended to, leave alone and shoot them in cold blood.
Yeah. Okay. And so like this, like from this point on is where I thought like the novel became very philosophically interesting because so maybe I was thinking about like, I don't know, there are a couple main themes from Camus' larger work that I thought would be interesting to maybe even like put on the table as we got to the more philosophically interesting stuff. Because I mean, so because I read The Stranger and then revisited some of his because I didn't want to corrupt the reading in the same way that you guys didn't know about his other work. But I revisited some of my notes about the Myth of Sisyphus, and okay, there are definitely some ideas that I thought were appropriate to table like before the discussion. So basically, we've often referenced in this series, but like in general, The Absurd by Thomas Nagel, that short essay. So actually, if you remember, Adam, you read this. Towards the end of The Absurd, Nagel responds directly to Camus. If you remember that, he says, so Camus also discusses the absurd. And he says that the absurd is kind of this disconnect between what he calls life's silence to our kind of questions for answers versus our own insatiable curiosity. So basically, like we cannot help but be intensely curious about, all of these deep existential questions, the meaning to life. Is there an afterlife? Where did we come from? What is our purpose? Right. And he says that, the universe kind of has like an austere silence with respect to that. And that disconnect there is where he thinks that the absurd kind of gets off the ground. And his answer to that, if you remember from The Absurd, is what Nagel calls slightly self-pitying, where Camus thinks that to respond to the absurd is to rebel against it and to sort of create your own meaning, even though there objectively is kind of there is no like metaphysical or ontological meaning to life, right? Like life truly is meaningless, but the way to rebel against that is to directly kind of go against it and almost spitefully or scornfully or like with respect to the silence, you create your own meaning, right? But he says that the absurdity also is like, it results also from the repetition of life and the recurrence of things, and this is where obviously like I'm not spoiling anything because everyone knows the myth of Sisyphus generally speaking. So like Sisyphus was a lower level god who was condemned by the gods to roll the boulder up the hill over and over and over again, and it would every time he would reach its task it would roll back down. And like the most famous line from the myth of Sisyphus is Camus implores us to believe that one must imagine Sisyphus happy. And so he thinks that like, kind of, Sisyphus is shaking because I'm not spoiling anything essentially because excuse me, Nagel talks about this too. So it's like, this is just a very like high level overview.
Sure.
But Camus almost paints Sisyphus as like shaking his fist against the gods, rolling the boulder like in spite of them, and that's what Nagel calls kind of self-pitying in a way. Like it's a little bit over the top, in some sense. But sort of in light of like the absurdity of life, Camus thinks that the central, primary, potentially even only question that we must answer is whether or not to take our own lives. And he says to commit suicide. Now, he means that in two senses, actually, which is kind of interesting. And this is the last thing I'll say before, because this shows up for me in a lot of like the second part of the novel. He says that there are two ways to commit suicide. One is obviously kind of the extinguishing of one's own life, right? That's the physical way of committing suicide. But he also thinks that there's a philosophical way to commit suicide. And he thinks that is, remember we talked about how Nietzsche thinks that like most people are camels. Camus essentially paints philosophical suicide as being a camel willingly. So basically, uh, in the way that Sartre says that, this like radical freedom that we have is so intense and it's so robust that it creates nausea in people and they kind of turn away from it. And he says that, we have those bad faith stories about determinism being true and how we actually don't choose our lives and everything like that. Well, the same thing is kind of going on in Camus' view of the world, where there is this silence from the universe as to our questions about, meaning. And so a lot of people will turn and embrace an ideology or sort of like a set of beliefs that answer all of those questions for them. And, Camus talks like religion is obviously one, but modern day versions of this are, being like consumed in just like social media or like buying things or just like the very kind of, like materialistic lifestyle. And just not thinking about it or like distracting yourself with it. But basically, so those are all forms of like committing philosophical suicide, is not being strong enough to know that your questions won't be answered, but to endeavor to kind of investigate them regardless. So I don't know about you guys, but like I kind of saw some of those themes potentially kind of spurting up here and there about the trial specifically, but also his like his inaction. And one thing that I don't know, like I definitely don't want to answer this now. Yeah, go ahead, Giffen.
No, I was going to say, do we want to discuss like some of the important plot points? We didn't really get.
Yes, I was gonna throw it back to you. Okay. Yeah.
Throw it back to me.
Yeah, if we want to, like, we could just that was a little bit longer than I intended it to be, but like okay, like back to the stranger in some sense. You know what I mean?
Okay. Well, where do we leave off with the narrative?
Well, and this was like the first point
Merceau takes the gun from him, anticipating that it would be bad if he just killed the Arabs in cold blood.
But this is where I began, like, this was crazy to me. Were you guys like, I was kind of like gripping the book when he did this. So because nothing really happens. And Ramon and Merceau just go back to the beach house. But then like I was like, what the hell are you doing? Like, did like Giffen, you want to say what happens next?
Yeah, so Merceau is just kind of like, what is he like, kind of just like walking along the beach, and then he discovers like
so he still has the gun.
He still has the gun.
He just like goes back to the beach.
Yeah, he goes back to the beach, takes like a walk, which it doesn't seem like there's any intention to it. He kind of just like walks because he can't think of a reason not to. He sees like almost sunbathing like next to a rock is like the Ramon's guy, right? Like the brother of the woman he was beating.
Yeah.
And he there's this kind of like odd standoff where he kind of like just watches him and just kind of what are some like the comments he makes internally?
It was like the most absurd thing I've ever read.
But you have to recall, like, the walk to like the Arabs.
Yeah.
I mean, there's like this oppressive heat where, and he's also drank a lot, throughout the day as well. So he's drunk and he's having some sort of like, almost like heat-induced mania.
Heat exhaustion.
He's
like,
exhausted from the heat. Yeah.
I mean, he's not in his right mind, right?
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
So it's not as though he just like went for a stroll. Like he's not in his right mind at this point, and this is the point where you kind of left off here, where he sees the Arabs, as you said, just sort
I thought it was just the one.
Wasn't it just the one? Yeah.
That's what.
Yeah. Regardless, he sees the one like laying in the sand there, and there's kind of like just like this stare down for a while where he, says things along the lines that, it feels almost as though time and all occurrences have kind of paused at that moment as they're just kind of like looking at each other. And then the Arab pulls out the knife to kind of like indicate, okay, don't come any closer. Like I'm still armed. Right.
Yeah.
But the way I read it was that, because the sun was so bright, like the blade itself kind of like shined and it kind of blinded him. And that kind of set him off to then fire into the Arab once and then to fire 4 more times.
I almost wonder if I should read. I'm trying to find it right now because the way it was written was extremely ambiguous.
I don't think he was assaulted.
No.
No, definitely not.
No. Like,
It's just a matter of like what kind of, because he was like talking about the feeling the heat, and there was like a moment where he like kind of takes a step forward, and that's like kind of like I can't take the heat anymore. I must take a step forward, and that kind of like rapidly precipitates towards the shot, I think. But
yeah, I thought it was I thought it was once he was blinded too. Then he
Yes.
So there's
sort of
definitely the
panicked.
flashings
Yeah.
of like the blade because the
Yeah.
air
Just
kind of
read
like pulls it out, but doesn't like he doesn't like
This was like the most absurd thing that I've ever seen, or well, I guess ever read. Okay, so he says, but I took one step forward,
yeah.
and this time without getting up, the Arab drew his knife and held it up to me in the sun. The light shot off the steel, and it was like a long flashing blade cutting at my forehead. At the same instant, the sweat in my eyebrows dripped down over my eyelids all at once and covered them with a warm, thick film. So he's like blinded at this point. He goes, my eyes were blinded behind the curtain of tears and salt. All I could feel were the symbols of light crashing on my forehead, and indistinctly, the dazzling spear flying up from the knife in front of me. The scorching blade slashed at my eyelids and stabbed at my stinging eyes. That's when everything began to reel. The sea carried up in a thick, fiery breath. It seemed to me as if the sky split open from one end to the other to rain down fire. My whole body tensed, and I squeezed my hand around the revolver. The trigger gave. I felt the smooth underside of the butt, and there, in that noise, sharp and deafening at the same time, is where it all started. I shook off the sweat in the sun. I knew that I had shattered the harmony of the day, the exceptional silence of a beach where I'd been happy. Then I fired 4 more times at the motionless body, where the bullets lodged without leaving a trace. And it was like knocking 4 quick times on the door of unhappiness. So it's like, what do you guys make of that entire thing where it's like, okay, he was not in that moment. He like the account he gives makes it so strange where it's like, okay, so like the Arab brandishes the knife first, but then he's advanced to the point where like, what did he expect the Arab to do essentially?
Yeah,
And
I don't
then,
think they were
like-
close enough for him to actually have been physically threatened there. Like, I think the Arab pulled out the knife, was like, hey, I like, like Adam said, like, I have a knife here.
I got the sense that they were probably about like 5 steps away or something like that. Like
I
5 to 10
thought
paces.
farther.
I thought farther as well.
Yeah.
Enough where like the Arab reasonably couldn't have like, outwon the battle with a gun.
Well, but I thought so no, but like I guess the reason why I thought it was closer is because he had been kind of like taking 1 step forward at a time. And then also like he was kind of blinded when he pulled the trigger. So it almost seemed as though he knew like the direction to fire in. Like it, you know what I mean? If you're like 30 feet away, that's extremely unlikely that you would just be able to do that.
Yeah, which just plays into the absurdity. I'm actually not sure he was that
Really?
close.
Okay.
Yeah, like I don't.
Okay, I read it differently.
Yeah, we can go back on that one, but I think he fired the gun not intending to hit the guy, and he hit him square.
Oh, really?
So yeah.
Wow. Okay, I read it very differently.
That's kind of the impression that I got as well, Adam. Like,
okay.
They were like far enough away that like he easily could have just like kind of walked away. Like there wasn't any like need for altercation. Like they weren't at the point of no return at all at this point.
No,
like,
that I don't think that was true for my account.
Sweat pours and
yeah.
Well, I mean, if you're 5 paces from each other, that's like that's pretty damn close.
Well, but the Arab had not advanced. You know what I mean? So it wasn't.
He was still laying down, I think, right?
Yeah,
he was kind of like on his side,
so.
like with a knife, but like he was still laying down.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so like, I don't know, like the entire thing where it was just like it almost seemed as though the way he paints that account, doesn't it make it seem like the shots were almost induced by like the sun and the sweat?
Yeah, he squeezes his hand, right?
Yeah, it's like very strange where he's just like, he's almost like this passive observer of everything, where it's just like the sun and the sweat, and then like my finger just squeezed. And
yeah,
like,
the Arab and the gun almost don't even play a role, right? It's like the sun spears him in the eyes, the sweat pours over, he squeezes his hand, the trigger gives, right? Like doesn't give, or did you just shoot the guy, right? Like
yeah.
And it was also just like, okay, I found it extremely hard to relate to this person, where I was just like, the entire time I kind of had like my hands in the like my hands up where I was like, why are you going back there? Like you know where he is.
That single decision is like the most absurd thing. And I actually didn't even kind of connect the fact that he was drinking earlier. Like Adam brought that up.
Yeah.
That does, add a lot of context to the situation that I otherwise this single encounter, like
Mm.
in the decisions, almost are disconnected from everything else. In a character that's already kind of like odd, that was just like, beyond the pale. But like the
Yeah.
drinking and like if you're thinking about extreme kind of like Mediterranean heat, like that kind of does add context. But still it's very, very strange. Fittingly.
Yeah, like the drinking also is an interesting question for me because like I mean phenomenologically you won't be able to relate to this Giffen, but like um I don't know, Adam. Okay, uh do you know, so this is like I can't understand this mindset where like obviously we've both been drunk many times, right? And I don't tend to do anything when I'm drunk. It's like, okay, yeah, like you wake up and you're like, ah, that was a little embarrassing or whatever, or like, I kind of like, but they're all like minor. Everything I tend to do when I'm drunk is just like, it's like a little bit farther maybe than I would have gone in like real life with like this conversation or like, that joke or, whatever. I said real life though. I meant like sober. I meant when I was sober. But have you ever met those people? Have you ever met those people where it's like they almost cease to have like rational capacities at all?
Yeah, I've met those people.
You.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like okay, what I don't know, just like what do you think that says about their sober selves? Because there's almost like a sense in which you could just blame this on like, like Marsal could like say I was just drunk or whatever. It was like it wasn't me. But like I don't know.
Well, it's interesting that the alcohol doesn't come up at all, right? Like, I mean, in like the story,
In the
in the
trial,
accounts,
yeah.
in the trial, like
Yeah.
nothing. Like the lawyer doesn't even like it doesn't seem to play a role. So that's why I missed it the first time. But I mean,
Yeah,
even
I
then,
kind of missed it too.
it seems like if like going off of like kind of your explanation, Jordan, like it seems like this guy was probably in a state pretty close to his sober self. Like honestly, like if he was completely
Yeah.
sober in this case situation where like the sweat pours over his eyes, he just like hates the heat. He's like 3 times already in this short narrative we've seen him suffering from the heat. He just kind of like is an idiot and has the gun in his hand still, like squeezes. Like it seems to match sober or like drunk.
And he continually affirms that he's guilty throughout the trial. Like he doesn't actually disagree. Like he kind of does own the behavior.
He comments to the one police chief or whatever. He's like, he finds it strange that like people are asking him questions and things like that. And he's like, I thought it was a very simple like matter. That's what he says.
Yeah, and also like I'm not going to point to exact quotes, but I mean he does identify with the label convict.
Yeah.
Pretty easily, and I mean like there are points where there's some dissociation to to where he's like, oh wait, I am a convict, right? But it's never like I've been mistakenly identified or charged, or I'm not ultimately responsible for the behavior. He seems pretty willing to own the behavior. So,
and I thought the odd thing about his internal dialogue there was that he never disputed that he was sort of like legally or causally responsible, but he seemed to almost view it in like an amoral manner, didn't he? He didn't reflect on whether it was sort of like justifiable, or it's like, oh, what, honestly, like, yeah, this was kind of like a legally stupid thing to do, but that guy got what he deserved, or like, or the opposite. He was like, I can't believe I killed a man over this just like stupid fight with like, Ramon. It was just like, he almost reacted as like he was just kind of like dropped into that part of his life and was just like, oh, this is just kind of like what happened, I guess.
Yeah, we should read like part of the quote that he gives to the chaplain at the end, because I mean I think that relates to what you just said there. Let me bring that up.
Yeah. Yeah, because I had a few of these sections highlighted myself.
Yeah, let me just read this part here.
Yeah.
What page?
This is 120 for me.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm just gonna read the whole thing. But he said, then I don't know why, but something inside me snapped. I started yelling at the top of my lungs, and I insulted him, and I told him not to waste his prayers on me. I grabbed him by the collar of his cassock, and I was pouring out on him everything that was in my heart, cries of anger and cries of joy. He seemed so certain about everything, didn't he? And yet none of his certainties was worth one hair of a woman's head. He wasn't even sure he was alive because he was living like a dead man. Whereas it looked as if as if I was the one who'd come up empty-handed. But I was sure about me, about everything, sure that he could ever be, sure of my life and sure of the death I had waiting for me. Yes, that was all I had. But at least I had as much of a hold on it as it had on me. I had been right. I was still right. I was always right. I had lived my life one way, and I could have as well lived it another way. I had done this, and I hadn't done that. I hadn't done this thing, but I also done another. And so it was as if I had waited all this time for this moment and for the first light of the dawn to be vindicated. So especially that latter part right there, where it's like a very amoral sense that you were describing there, where it's like, I had lived my life one way and I could have just as well lived it another. You know what I mean? It's like there's no real moral scheme kind of imposed on that.
Yeah, he
comments behavior
several times. He's like, outside of this conversation we just read, where he's like, one life is, just as good as any other. Right?
Yeah.
He
does say that at one point. The thought about when he said, about the chaplain, he seemed so certain about everything, didn't he? And yet none of his certainties were worth one hair of a woman's head. I very much, that made me think about the absurdity there, where basically like he was pointing out that the chaplain is sort of like helpless, but to, ask these questions and to kind of come to a firm conviction that, just the Christian doctrine is true. But he almost, this is what I was kind of thinking about. Like, I almost wonder if, I don't know, there's a way in which this guy kind of conforms to a lot of the things Camus points out, like more philosophically, where he doesn't actually embrace like any of these kind of noble lies about life. But it doesn't lead him to a happy existence in any way. Like he doesn't, obviously like he has an ignominious end, but like he also didn't seem to be living a great life before that either. Like you don't get the sense that he was embroiled in like, passion projects and, had a career. Obviously he didn't have like a healthy romantic relationship, with Marie, where it was just like, it was very sensual from his end, and then just like, very like they were on emotionally two different pages for her end.
And I definitely understand what you're saying. And I also think that it kind of relates to, his desire to kind of fixate on the physical. I mean, just all his certainty wasn't worth a woman's single hair, right? In the sense that like, it's like that kind of brought back to me where it's like, okay, he's just obsessed with the physical sensations and, of life. And it's like, okay, this kind of highfalutin grand conception isn't anything to what I can touch, what I can feel.
A single woman's hair is worth infinitely more than like him talking about the afterlife, right?
Yeah, that's extremely interesting, actually. Because he almost, he almost, I was thinking about this too. He obviously is not happy to be in prison, but he's also, he sort of just describes the mechanistic nature of adapting to life. He was just, I craved cigarettes at first, but then upon not receiving the indulgences, I no longer craved them. Like that
it was no longer a punishment after I stopped craving them.
Yeah. And it was just like, okay, that's extremely, I was just like, I don't know. I mean, I feel like I would like lose my mind not being able to do stuff. And he's just sort of like the cigarettes were no longer a desire, a few months in.
That's true, but there's also like another weird aspect to that though, because it says something else about his psychology later on, right before the trial, when he's offered a cigarette and then he rejects it, right? So, because I almost get the sense that, okay, he knows that had he had that cigarette, then he might then suffer further in prison for a day or two, with further withdrawals. So I'm wondering if there was almost like some, sensuous kind of maximization on his part, knowing that, okay, I shouldn't indulge now because otherwise I'm going to have to further suffer. I don't know. I kind of get that sense from him a little bit, where it's like it's all about the nature of experience for him. So, because like you were just describing, like in prison, where it's like, okay, clearly the nature of his experience has changed, but you're right. He doesn't seem too upset by it. He seems still like just enamored by just the experience itself. Like,
what's odd about that? Well, so I think that reading is perfect, but then it makes me question his, like, I guess more global rationality, in the sense that, okay, take that like microcosm and just put it onto killing the Arab in the cave. It's like, okay, he kind of essentially took the cigarette there, right? Like he kind of had like he seemed to be a younger man, maybe in his like mid 30s or something like that.
Well, the difference seems to be like he didn't really even act. Like everything building up to that, like they were like actions of his, but kind of like in the moment it was like the sweat and the heat made him react physically, and then as Adam said, kind of absurdly he bullseyed the guy, right?
But the idea that like he knew where the cave was, or kind of like the outcropping or whatever, because he had just been there, right? So it was like he went back there with the gun. Like it almost made me think of like it's like very hard to come up with a good example, but he seemed to be engaging in those sort of like pre-steps to doing something, where that if you begin initiating the sequence of events, you'll reach like the thing, but then you can kind of mentally tell yourself, oh, I'm not actually, you know what I mean? It's like, it was like a good example. Yeah, it's sort of just like, I don't know. Like if you open up YouTube and you'd be like, I'll just find a video for later or whatever, like that's the biggest lie in the world. Like you're just gonna like you're gonna watch it there, or I don't know, there are a bunch of like examples, like
I'm just gonna add this to my watch later and then go back to work.
Yeah, it's just like
impossible.
You're a fool and a liar. And so that, like, that, it made me think of that, where I was just like, okay, the moment you the moment you set out to walk to the cave is almost synonymous with deciding to kill the man. You know what I mean? So it's like,
yeah, this is the thing where I'm not sure how reliable he is as a narrator. Like, because if we always get his complete kind of internal thoughts, then like it's almost like he actually did not go through that kind of self-deception at all. He just
that's true.
He observed the fact that it happened to go that way, right?
That is true. That is
so
true.
Yeah, it is kind of tricky.
It's uncertain
because he is, for the most part, like, obviously he's like an unemotional character, but he is a rational character throughout the book. Like a lot of the observations he does make are like ring true.
Yeah.
So
like actually this was just something I wanted to bring up a bit ago, but like when he commented a few times, like in situations that seem to be to his detriment, he's like he will say, it seems to have made complete sense to me, that this thing had happened, or like this thing had been the consequence of like actions, right? I think this happened once in the whenever he was like at the funeral, and then once again like at the prison, or like in one of the conversations with like lawyer or whatnot. Or he's very rational.
Or the prosecuting attorney whenever the prosecuting attorney was putting together a case against him.
Yeah, that's exactly
he thought it sounded pretty reasonable, just because the prosecuting attorney had put together a case where in each step there was an actor, right? Someone was making a decision, in fact, in each of these. Like why would he go back out to the beach? Like Jordan's question. Why would he fire into him 5 times?
Yeah.
Right? He's asking these questions about, okay, what were the intentions behind this behavior, right? And from Merceau's point of view, well, there was none. There was no intention to going back on the beach.
And
or there was
the
no
joke is kind of like,
yeah.
what is it like the it gets a laugh from like the people watching the trial, but it's like
it was the sun. You said it was the sun.
No, it was he did say it was the sun, but I mean like he blames it on kind of like happenstance or some like entity which is invoked like twice.
I think just chance is what he
says.
The
chance
right?
is what it is. Yeah. It's like chance has a lot to like answer for today. It's like
that was the quip like, from the prosecutor.
And like exactly, yeah. It's like then like the prosecuting attorney makes the case like obviously there is no entity called chance. Like some entity has to have been it. Some human had to have been making decisions. And then you have Merceau sitting over there. It's like, by God, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it was like extremely strange.
Very strange. There's disconnect there.
He almost struck me as like there's like kind of that stoic philosophy of like radical acceptance of just like, okay, like whatever happens, it's just that is what happened. Like I can't change the past, and I can't like it's kind of like disavowing almost like yearning for things. He almost struck me as like a pathological version of that. Or like kind of someone who's taken it too far, or like someone who's taken it in the wrong direction, where he was just sort of like he struck me as like content with almost anything.
Yeah, we very rarely have an instance where he actually articulates like or like his actions would seem to indicate like he perceives that a certain thing would like not be beneficial, right? He always indicates like indifference, but very rarely. One of the cases, again, one of the things that makes the following encounter jarring is like whenever he recognizes like, okay, Ramon, you should not have the gun right now. I will take the gun. There will be bad consequences likely in my rational brain. That's like one of the very few moments, and of course, like nothing comes of that.
Or his assessments, when he first enters prison, that there won't be women there. Like clearly, like that's a circumstance where he's like unhappy suddenly about that. And, it's like, but even that he eventually gets over to some extent.
I don't think he mentions it again.
Yeah,
he would think of Marie, like I think at one point, but like, it has been decided. It's like it is fact, and then kind of like never again touched.
It's so strange to me though, because like, so going back to Adam's analogy to like the cigarette, so he almost seemed like kind of a very basic utility maximizer, where he's just like, okay, like the pleasure of this one cigarette will not outweigh the withdrawals later, right?
Yeah.
It was just stunning to me that he couldn't make that same calculation with like just taking the gun back to the beach. It was like, okay, what kind of any pleasures that may come from just like killing a man will not outweigh the loss of like every other
there was no pleasure though. Like that's what I think.
True. Yeah,
like I truly think that the like, I mean, I don't want to kind of agree with him too much, but like it kind of did just happen that way, right? Like the sweat pours over his eyes, like he just like is like suffering from heat stroke and like dehydrated like intoxication, and just like squeezes. Like again, obviously like there had to have been an agent in all of these steps leading. Like why was he holding the gun pointing kind of roughly at him in the first place? But still,
is that his one lapse in rationality though in the book?
I don't think so.
Where is like another key area or another key lapse in his rationality?
When he writes the letter for Ramon, where it's like, okay, you're sort of implicating yourself in definitely like legal proceedings about an illegal activity there, right? So it was like he kind of owed nothing to Ramon. And he just upon kind of Ramon asking like, would you write this letter for me? He just,
I agree with that.
Yeah, it was very strange.
Yeah, it's that whole series of behavior.
That was an indifference that shouldn't have like that. That's where like his social intelligence being zero kind of like comes into play again.
Yeah, it was almost sort of like this guy couldn't get out of his own way in some sense. Where it was just
he observed even to himself. He's like, most people seem to have a poor opinion of this man, right? Like, but then he finds himself kind of like in his orbit.
I just wonder how like rejecting the cigarette fits in then. Like if he's not like
it doesn't involve any like people, right? It's a physical thing. He understands physical things, right? So he's very easy to make that kind of prognosis, right? Like,
Hmm.
if I take this, I will get pleasure, but then down the road I will not. But whenever it comes to people, it's like he's really just flipping coins.
He has a hard time understanding people. I
Yeah.
feel like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's some cases where like he does indicate like some understanding of like, oh, this person is experiencing like discomfort. I understand that this would like I would also do this, right?
but
But
in like a
like
very mechanistic
it
way.
is extraordinarily mechanistic.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I
the cigarette is like the easiest thing in the world for him, right? It's like it's like, would you like prefer to suffer or not? But like that anything involving people, it's like he kind of just like, oh, I suppose it just kind of happened. Like they kind of responded this way. Like it didn't occur to me that there was a negative reason to not be with this person. You know,
yeah.
the pimp that no one in the apartment complex liked.
It was he also I don't know, like it's like a very natural thing to do, like upon making a mistake to kind of revisit it and be like, okay, you know, what did what portion of this was my fault, what portion of this was someone else's fault or chance's fault. What could I kind of like, what lessons could I have learned,
Can
what I
I
mean, like,
inform future decisions based off of like observations I'm about to make
yeah.
about my
and,
actions?
and
But
that dialogue just like did not, it was just like not even there for a
never
moment.
initiated.
Yeah.
Does this man have any second order desires? I'm kind of curious, like
Oh
to what
shit.
extent he's lacking, right?
Does
Like
he want to
he's so
want things?
physical and so personal. Like
He does seem like a wanton, honestly.
So
he
I
might
think he
be.
I think he definitely has second order desires, but he does, I don't think he has second order volitions. So he would be a
Oh
wanton
wow,
then. Yeah.
he is a wanton.
Because so I think he obviously has first order desires. That's obvious. He lusts after Marie, he wants the cigarette, etc. Right. And I think he has like kind of glimmers of second order desires in the sense that, he reflects on the fact that like, oh, like I actually don't want to be in jail right now. And he seems to be okay with that fact in a way that he's he's
That'd be a first order
Yeah, I
desire,
was gonna
right?
say that's not even a second order desire.
Yeah.
well, I was saying okay with the fact that he's not like, he's not he's not, how do I want to phrase it, like, because I don't think he's actually like reflected too much on like what levels of desires, but he does all that fantasizing about wanting to escape. But then so he clearly wants to escape, but he then will say, well, I shouldn't actually think about this. I don't want to think about this because it'll like, he says, give me hope or something like that. He talks in terms of like his own psychology, but he doesn't seem to have like a robust kind of second order volition where he decisively identifies with, like, you know what I mean? Like
It's
with
always I can't think of a reason not to, and then it seemed to have happened to me. No, so I
yeah,
think that's a pretty fair. I think he at the least does have glimmers of second order desires, but
but he
like
definitely doesn't have second order
again,
volitions.
this goes back to like the prose. It's like he is able to state the fact that he's desirous of something, right? Or that it feels good, right? If
Yeah.
but like that is like 90% of what we get from him.
It also uh he also, okay, I'd actually like to continue reading the quote that Adam initially started reading.
Sure.
Because he also like just begins to talk about like the absurdity of life in general after that. So he continues, this is right where Adam left off. Nothing mattered, and I knew why. So did he being the chaplain. Throughout the whole absurd life I'd lived, a dark wind had been rising toward me from somewhere deep in my future, across years that were still to come. And as it passed, this wind leveled whatever was offered to me at the time, in years no more real than the ones I was living. What did other people's deaths or a mother's love matter to me? What did his God or the lives people chose or the fate they think they elect matter to me when we're all elected by the same fate? Me and billions of privileged people like him who also called themselves my brothers. Couldn't he see? Couldn't he see that? Everybody was privileged. There were only privileged people. The others would all be condemned one day, and he would be condemned too. What would it matter if he were accused of murder and then executed because he didn't cry at his mother's funeral, which for listeners is why, like a large reason why he was executed. Um, Salamano's dog was worth just as much as his wife.
That's one of my favorite lines.
The little robot woman was just as guilty as the Parisian woman Masson married, or as Marie, who had wanted me to marry her. What did it matter that Ramon was as much my friend as Celeste, who was worth a lot more than him? What did it matter that Marie now offered her lips to a new Mersal? So he was just like, he just like, and he's shouting all of this like at the chaplain. He's just like, okay, tell me like a deep reason why any of these lives are more meaningful or like intrinsically better than the others. And it's like, okay, I definitely like relate to Nagel more about this, where he's like, okay, yeah, like ultimately, yeah, all of those lives have the same level of kind of cosmic or ultimate meaning. None. But they're very different types of lives. Like the life in which you know, are actually like a good kind of like, you know, dutiful husband to Marie, you have a happy marriage. Like that life is like substantially different than the one that you're on the road of right now. You know what I mean? He's like,
Yeah.
okay, I don't know. We should honestly reread The Absurd, like with Giffen in this series.
Yeah, we definitely should.
We definitely
That'd
should.
be great.
Given this new context.
Yes,
So,
yes.
yeah.
Maybe if there's a section of the Myth of Sisyphus, we could pair it with that. But
That'd
it's
be
just
good.
like, I don't know about you guys, but well, this isn't actually a fair question to ask yet. I should ask this question. I was going to say, kind of the three authors we've read so far, who do you empathize with most? And it's definitely not Camus for me so far. Like I definitely relate to Sartre more than Camus so far.
Are we talking about authors or the characters, the protagonists?
Authors.
Okay. Those are different questions.
No, yes. Because it was like I was
particularly
kind of thinking,
after the supplemental reading we've done from each of the authors, like that.
Yeah, but
their worldviews versus like the protagonists.
Yes, and I think that it's an unfair question to ask so far because we haven't read like the, you know, kind of the underlying philosophy from Camus.
Yeah.
But like I was thinking about, you know, Mersal with respect to the previous like episode, Existentialism as a Humanism by Sartre.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy almost seems to be like the radical counterexample to his like you must choose, where this guy like chooses nothing almost.
Nothing is just the same as moving. This is actually I was going to bring up. Do you remember whenever he was like marching towards like the I think it was like the burial grounds or like in the funeral kind of process in the first
when they were going up
scenes.
to the via or whatever.
Yeah. So like this is like this kind of long march, and like one of the nuns or something, I don't remember, or one of the old ladies or caretakers was like, you know, it was about like the heat, like no matter, like you have one option one way and you have one option another way, and either way like you're gonna get, like, it doesn't matter, right? And that's kind of like where he kind of agrees to the pinnacle at the very end with the chaplain is like, you know, to move or to not move, it doesn't make a difference. There is no difference, right? Like that's kind of like a key difference there. It's like there's a substantial difference between those two things for, like, you know, I think all three of us, but like for this character, like right before he dies, this is his revelation, is like there actually is no difference between anything. Lives lived are the same.
That's a great callback. Yeah.
Action versus inaction itself are like, it's all the same in the end, right?
And he's almost like, I almost get the sense that this character is caught up in the fact that there's no absolute meaning to any of this. And he just like lets that, I mean, you know, I'm just agreeing with like Nagel again here, which like we'll just read him at this point. But I get the sense that like this guy is just failing to realize that there are different types of like local meaning that you can establish. Okay, yeah, there's no ultimate meaning, but like
you can't just put that down and then just like, you know, drift away.
Yeah, and it's also just like, you know, Adam kind of suggested that this guy might be like a very simple utility maximizer. And at first, like I thought, oh, that's kind of right too. But then it's like he just clearly betrays that by just like kind of murdering for no reason. You know, because he was set up for a life of like pleasure, essentially. He seems to be not wealthy, but he doesn't seem to.
He's a modest salary.
Yeah, he doesn't
no obligation with the mother anymore.
No, and he was also like, you know, seems like he's got like a hot babe in Marie who's just like, you know, kind of fawning for him. You know, like many people comment on her beauty. You know, it's just like, and she's just head over heels for him. It's just like, I don't know, he's just like thrown everything away for nothing, but it didn't even matter to him because nothing matters in the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just I was a very I don't know, it was jarring almost to like read that.
Yeah, I think you put it pretty succinctly there. I mean, that's exactly the what happened in the book.
Yeah.
I mean, like he had everything, but it meant nothing to him, and he threw it away.
Yes,
which also meant
So-
nothing.
Yeah, which also meant
With
nothing.
the loss
So-
meant nothing too, which is
Yeah.
like yeah. Um
Good as any other life.
yeah, it's so strange actually.
Lived
It'll
another
be-
40 years. What's the difference,
Yeah.
Which actually is going to, I think, tie into the Myth of Sisyphus then.
Yes.
Because I like I said, I think I accidentally listened to like the first 5 pages of the audiobook.
Okay.
But
I did kind of agree with him a little bit on that point, though. Like, just
well,
like,
I was gonna
like,
say, yeah, I was just gonna say,
yeah, I mean, like dying 20 years earlier versus like dying
Hmm.
20 years later. I mean, it's just like, I don't know.
there is a sense in which you kind of have to agree to that, but then like
I was gonna say
he rejects. He's content with that. He's like, that there it is. There's my ultimate philosophy.
well, so I was gonna say like this may be an experience that Adam can relate to a bit more than you potentially, given just because like Adam and I were raised like super religious. But like do you remember that kind of very interloping moment, Adam? It was it's like a transitory state, I think, for both of us, obviously, but like I think for most people, where when you kind of disavow or exit a staunch belief system like that, you do tend to kind of overcorrect to relativism or nihilism of a sense, where it's just like this one kind of set of value systems was so restrictive and so forcefully kind of thrust upon you that you overcorrect into the other way. But obviously, both of us have come back to the kind of more like local meaning where it's like, okay, yeah, eternity probably doesn't exist. There's no reason to think it does. So it's just like, this life is what matters. And I think we both take like a very Nagel view of that. Whereas this guy seems to just almost focus on the fact that there is no afterlife. And he's just like, he just views everyone as fools in some sense.
The weird part is it's not even a focus because he has no interest in the idea. Right?
True. But he does.
There's no overcorrection because there was no correction.
Well, but he does spew a bit of hatred for like the chaplain's certainty and all these things. He's just
true.
He does.
I think it's easy to relate as someone who went through the like what you're describing, Jordan. But like,
well, what if
it's like he speaks with his own certainty on things, though.
Yeah,
like I mean, like
his physical, like, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's just like his. I mean, he does proclaim pretty strongly, like like whole lives are ultimately the same, and
right.
that there is no, these things mean nothing, and it's like, okay, he himself speaks with like a certain dogmatism as well.
Yeah,
like,
that's very true.
There's like a that kind of line of nihilism that goes through his thinking. Like it's a very dogmatic way of viewing the world as well. I don't know if you got that sense, but I certainly did near the end whenever he was just going on that diatribe.
Yeah, he was railing against it, but he was also kind of succumbing to it in a way, right?
He almost kind of completed the circle of like, he realized things were meaningless, and that meant so much to him that like he almost fell for his own trap. It's something like that, where because like Nagel's definition of the absurd differs slightly from Camus, where he says like the absurd is created by, because Camus thinks that the absurd is like this he thinks it's like a fundamental principle like of reality itself, whereas Nagel, like kind of in line with the rest of his philosophy on this, like he takes a much more kind of local meaning of the absurd, where he just thinks that the absurd is created by this disjoint between our constantly taking life seriously. We think our grades matter, we think our salary matters, we think what our friends think of us matters, you know what I mean? But we can always step back and consider that ultimately none of that matters, in this like ultimate meaning sense. And it's sort of like I almost read this guy as like Mersal almost like failed to read Nagel, in the sense that like he was swept up in the fact that life had no ultimate meaning, And that fact itself kind of became his ultimate meaning.
Actually, are we being too harsh on him? I want to pose this for a second here. Okay, because
was the murder justified?
No.
Consider this.
Jordan, imagine yourself in his position. What consolation could Nail give you on, like, if
so you mean once I'm in prison?
Like, you're in prison, you've just been sentenced to death, okay? Like, this is going to happen within a year. Like, you know what I mean? Like, or this could happen within a few days.
Was my reading that, wasn't it like the
next
day?
No. I'm talking about for you. No, it's a few days.
Okay, I'm sorry.
But for you, so, like, this whole process, like, year out, you've been in prison for a while, and you've been executed, and it's going to be days out at this point. And, like a chaplain comes in to, like to offer you some meaning, like some ultimate meaning. I mean, like what sort of, like, dialogue do you think you would have, like, in those moments? Like, do you think
ultimate meaning?
Do you think you would draw upon Nagel, just saying, like, my life had, like, local meaning, like, you know, like, here's what it meant to me ultimately? Or do you think you would just explode in this sense of just, like, the absurdity of life?
I can totally empathize with them. And it's just like,
the thing is, that's consistent with his previous philosophy as well, like before he committed a murder, right?
Whereas Jordan, like, can kind of us, I would definitely just be like, I would be just like, the absurdity of life would be crashing down upon me. Is like, just,
it is true.
So
it is true. Oh shoot, I had a thought, but it actually escaped me.
I had a question I kind of wanted to pose, very close to what you had, and I kind of already brought it up, but I was curious, considering we have read, like, the three narratives with the three protagonists, which protagonists, again, not the author's philosophies you map onto the most, but, like, in the narratives, which ones did you relate to the most versus which ones you, didn't map onto as well in your experience?
I would say definitely I would say...
So there's the Underground Man, there's Antoine, and then there's Meursault.
Yeah. Well, Underground Man is 100%, like, takes the cake for me. Well, so again, I should say, like, happily, I don't relate to any of these people, like, too closely.
Yeah, they're hyperbolic, but...
Yes. But the whole kind of, like, over analyzing, I think I'm prone to do, like the Underground Man does. And then the sort of, like, he also is self-questioning in a way that the other two characters weren't. I'm not in a position to know. I don't think that I face the same sort of social problems that the Underground Man did.
Giffen and I both look at each other just like... Yeah. Hold your horses on that one.
Well, easy.
Maybe not quite over analysis either.
Yeah.
Barely able to pick up.
I don't know. I don't think anyone out on this podcast is going to say differently than the Underground Man. But I will say this. There were moments of Meursault's lifestyle that were just, like, that spoke of almost like a halcyon, that, like, I would just like, like, what an amazing life. You know what I mean? Just, like, even, like, from his, because, like, I remember, like, Jordan, you said you're like, I can't imagine living the life of Antoine for a week, right? I think I could happily live Meursault's lifestyle, like, even with his psychology. Like, I mean, it's like a very almost like hedonistic approach to life in a sense, where it is just very sensuous, but at the same time, it's like, well, I mean, it's just like, I mean, he lives, like, on the Mediterranean,
of course,
with a beautiful
woman.
He swims constantly, and it's just like his apartment opens to a terrace that, like, overlooks, like, a small town on the Mediterranean. I mean, it sounds.
He also doesn't seem to be possessed by inaction in the same way that Antoine was.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I agree with that. I did relate to Meursault in the sense that, I don't know, like, we definitely talked about this with the Second Order Desires paper, but, like, I definitely act wantonly from time to time, where I step back and I'm like, ooh, like what like you kind of almost in a you can't in a second order desire way account for like the past couple of days or whatever, or like, that's a little exaggerating maybe, but like the morning, or like you don't really, you're like, you kind of like look back on something, you're like, I don't even know why I did that.
No, yeah. I kind of agree. So where I stand is like Underground Man number one, but I've actually like it's a close second, like with a Merceau. Like I've had definitely periods in my life, like in my past, where I've kind of like
In your present.
just the other day, in fact.
Right now.
Right now I'm committing a murder.
No, it'll just happen. There's no thinking about it.
True,
It just
true.
happens. But no, like there have definitely been like periods in my life where I kind of like observed, like, those kind of things did just kind of happen to me,
Yeah.
and like I kind of
Yes.
like almost forwent like the agency for periods of time, right? Like
Yeah.
I can think of periods in high school and college where this was the case.
Oh,
Much less so
yeah.
recently, but like so there again, like he seems to live his entire life like this, and there's never been like a moment where of like a reflection about it. It just kind of like is, right? Like there's no like other experience to like compare it to for him. It kind of
Dude,
just is life. So it's
yeah,
like different,
dude,
but like
yes.
I've definitely experienced that. So it's like Underground Man number one, and then Merceau, like for periods of my time, like 1.5, and then it's like Antoine like 6. We've only read 3, but
The
I had a hard time mapping on him.
it's actually really funny. The experience of applying to undergrad
I was
was
thinking the exact same thing.
dude, I was literally Mersal when doing
Literally,
that.
what is the difference?
No, I was but so I've actually like lived both lives in the past, whatever, 6 years, where when I was applying, I was literally a one-ton. Like I was like I'm not even just exaggerating this, literally a one-ton with respect to, okay, like we've obviously talked about this on the podcast before, but like our high school was not like the best in terms of like career preparation, or like it didn't actually focus on like those kind of aspects of life, you know what I mean, where it was
It didn't
just
give you
like,
the tools for like analysis of your like heavy
no,
decisions that
it was
were
just
like
like
coming your
pass the
way.
PSSAs or whatever they were, and just like get out of like our high school. Essentially was just like, and then also, like, obviously you guys know that like my family is not academically minded, so it was like, okay.
No.
Oh. So it was like, dude, the experience of applying to college is like, I remember I literally didn't even choose to like major in engineering. It was just like I kind of found myself like I was like just
100%.
I was just like applying to the engineering school. I was like, well, I didn't even know like what I was doing.
Literally, Jordan, that is exactly what I was thinking of whenever I invoked high school.
Dude,
That is the thing. It's like the information absence is just like someone's like, so how, what led to this? And you're like, well,
no, literally my
you're like,
account would be the sun and the sweat.
the sweat in my eyes, and I was a biologist.
No, literally, like, dude, my account would be, like metaphysically or like psychologically indistinguishable from the sweat and the sun.
Yeah.
There.
So
just like,
the fact that I can like point to periods of time in my life where I was Merceau, makes him like, very close to the Underground Man in that case. Whereas the Underground Man, it's like he's a hyperbolic version of like what I experienced. For Merceau, it's like I've experienced him for like periods of time or moments.
right? Yeah. So I was going to say the experience of applying and then eventually accepting like the graduate programs was kind of a combination of the Underground Man and Antoine in many ways, because so like, the fact that I got like accepted to like multiple master's programs made me extremely related, like made me relate to a high degree to the Underground Man, where I was like overanalyzing everything. Like I know,
Yeah.
like, Giffen, you and I had like many conversations
The
where
thing
I was
is,
just like,
we're similar enough that like I was in it too. I was like invested.
yes, you were
I was
just
like, the calculus is there.
I could literally like see you on the other end of the Discord where you were just like, okay, but like, what was the cost of living in this other one place? I was like, so that made me like very much relate to the kind of like acting to one's advantage in that sense. But then at the end of the day, oh my god, this actually just like this just clicked for me. In Sartre's, meaning and existentialism, or existentialism as humanism.
Yeah.
all of these systems. Like I had this spreadsheet and I had all of this shit laid out. And at the end of the day, no system of thought could tell me which choice to make. I was but
The
free
fact
to
that you
choose.
chose that system of thought
Literally, yes,
ultimately would lead to the choice.
and it was the fact that like also Houston was not the program that offered me the most money. It was not like the place that was in the best like cost of living. It was, you know what I mean? It was just like, but like at the end of the day, I was just
You
like
have to choose.
Sartre's. Yes, I was just like, I was like the student who like came to Sartre. He was like, you are free, therefore choose. So I have like many experiences where I can deeply relate to all three characters.
Yeah, I don't know. What is, I actually have to ask this again, but like, what was the Antoine kind of relation there? Because,
well, so yeah, you're right. I talked about Sartre there, but not Antoine.
Exactly. That was my problem with that character. And after we read a little bit more of Camus, we can have this discussion about the philosophies. But in terms of like the characters, about these are all like the important novels from, or novellas from these.
Yeah.
And like psychologically, like these are very prominent pieces. So I was curious.
So for Antoine, it was definitely like the pull of inaction, kind of generated by like the Dostoevsky like over analysis almost, where it was just like,
yeah,
I felt like it was almost like kind of, Sartre was telling the truth, where it's like, you are free, therefore choose. And then I was at times like almost Antoine in the sense where I was like not choosing.
Yeah.
You
in terms of the actions, I think I can relate to that. It's just his psychology in particular, where like the nauseous feeling, like I had a very hard time with. But
I definitely did get the nausea of just like it in a sense, like, okay, like I definitely felt because kind of the idea of choosing like a school is a concentration of many other decisions, when you choose many decisions, you don't know the gravity of them. They could be larger than you think, they could be smaller than you think, but like this one, there's like, you can kind of calibrate, like this is a fairly, a large gravity, situation that I'm choosing. And so like I very much did feel like that nauseating feeling of just like, you must choose, and there's only like one path you can choose, and there is no refrain from the choice.
I think that's fair. Yeah. I partly asked the question because I wanted to see if I could allow myself to have related to Antoine more than I thought at first.
I think I definitely relate to him the least.
Yeah. Okay, Adam, we were talking there a lot, but I maybe reiterate what you had said, or I don't know.
I mean, like I definitely, like, I'm not on the same page with you guys when it comes to like how you guys make decisions.
That's why I was curious.
Like I don't know. I guess maybe this speaks poorly on me or poorly of me, but like a lot of big decisions like don't hit me with the gravity of how big they are. They're just almost like any other decision. So, like, for example, like the idea of like, if I were to like choose between two master's programs, like I wouldn't feel like the weight of that decision. I would probably just look it over and then choose, but then be done with it. Like I honestly, like that's how it was for me for college at the very least. That's how a lot of my decisions are made, where it's not that there isn't, some calculus that goes into it, but it's not that like
once you get the answer, it's done.
Yeah, and I don't really like second guess shit like down the line. Like I just kind of like, if I choose it, I choose it, and it's just kind of
So the interesting thing is that I haven't second guessed it since I made the decision.
Well, don't focus on that part. Think about did you feel the weight, the gravity of the decision?
Oh, of course I did. But the interesting thing is that I also recognized that I never felt that gravity when choosing to apply to grad schools. It was, so I'm like, I think I experienced, I don't know, I feel like I'm like realizing that I have a wide breadth of types of experiences than when like making decisions. Because when you said like it actually doesn't strike you as that, I totally related to that in the sense that I literally chose to like quit a very lucrative job, like a very secure job, to do the opposite of those two things. And it like was not, I literally just kind of did it. You know what I mean? It wasn't like I need to like deliberate about this.
Yeah, I definitely had your experience, Adam, for sure. Both in like the past, in applying to college, and but also more recently. But yeah, I'm like thinking back, and it was like
What
I was
category to click on?
No, like when in terms of like picking majors, it was like I was remembering back. I was like, like I remembered enjoying like the subject of biology. So it's like it seems like that was the decision I had already made.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Or like me starting the tutoring business. I mean,
Yeah.
it sounded like a good idea, so I did it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There wasn't
Yeah.
like moments where I was
Yeah, that's
just
impressive,
like,
actually. Like
what? It was just like
it's a lot more than just that single decision, and you kind
no,
of came through.
no, for sure. I mean, like I just thought was like, okay, well, how does it need to get done? Like I would need to get a place. How am I going to advertise? Started doing that. Like I don't know. Like it just started like it seemed like a good idea, so I just went with it. There wasn't like this moment where I was just like holy shit, what am I doing? Like this is like a very very big decision here. It was more like
I would have had that.
I know, but like I was aware that it was.
I would
like
have felt the weight.
Yeah,
of the gravity.
I mean, like I just like I understood it was a big decision, but at the same time, like I just it
Adam's
didn't,
like
it didn't
I
linger.
understand that other people will view it that way.
No, it's just like I'm kind of struggling to think in my life right now of like where I've been presented with a choice, and it struck me like the magnitude of the situation is like struck me with that single choice.
If you have uncertainties, do you feel gravity? Because I think mine might be related to that. Like it's one thing if like you kind of just like ask yourself the question, you're like, wow, I'm observing that I'm this like leaning here.
Giffen, what you said actually made me realize that I think the only time I've ever felt that way was about deciding between the grad school programs, like specifically between them. And I was kind of trying to think about that like experience more. And I've kind of never been in a position in life where I have like so many good options. Like, because right, we talked about like when I applied to like colleges, I just applied to like essentially Pitt and Penn State, where there are only live options there, and then it was just like, okay, Pitt's better, I'll just go there, right? It was just like, okay, well, when I like accepted the job, it was just like, okay, they gave me an offer, it's good pay, just like where I want to like kind of I just take it, right? But like this was the first time ever actually that I've had like multiple good options, and I'm actually wondering if like the reason why I felt that nausea for the first time ever, I think, was actually because I don't know how to phrase it. It wasn't like an uncertainty about like, it wasn't, how do I want to phrase it? I think it actually came down to it was really difficult to find the right answer, as opposed to, I don't think I sat on the right answer for a long time and sort of like rode that wave of just, it's really hard to explain this, but do you guys get what I'm kind of going for?
Yeah, it didn't seem like the decision was clear.
I think that was actually it. And I think this was one
a
of the
lot of my
first times
decisions have
ever.
been clear. Like
Yeah.
it's like even if like I like say like I'm presented with something and I don't even follow through on it, right? But like even in those, yeah, of course, yeah. Well, regardless, baboons.
Like, I won't even deny it.
Because let's quiet the zoo.
A howling monkey over here.
Yeah. Anyway, but like even in those situations, like the magnitude isn't as much the experience, just considering like I do know what the right decision is. Like I like very rarely like can I think of circumstances where I'm like I'm not sure what's the better option.
Yeah.
Right.
See, Adam, you both should know this, but I am like someone who like I will admit to like being agnostic so often. It's like I will discover myself feeling that there's like a certainty about the decision, but I know that like I simply don't know, and like I experience like uncertainty so frequently. Like that might I almost wish that I kind of experienced the way Adam did, right? Where it's like it's like, well, okay, well, it seems like this is what's going to be done. It's like, I need to do this. I'll do this. It's like, oh, this is the decision to do over this. Like, it's very straightforward.
I'm realizing that, wow, that's crazy.
At least with like big decisions. With small decisions, I feel like I can relate to that. But like,
dude, this is crazy. This is the way I answered was so skewed by the most recent like set of decisions I've made, because that's actually the only time ever. I'm thinking of every other decision I've ever made, like even recent ones, like where I'm gonna live in Texas. I literally just like, there were two guys who were in like the second year or going into the second year of the program. I just applied, I got accepted. I did, that's where I'm going. Like that's where where I'm living. Like there's no, there was no anything. Like it seemed like a fine place to live. I just did it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Even as far as like uh because like you guys know, I've been like working on the BMW for a while, so I like want to take that down. And it was just like, oh geez, like that's a long road trip for like a 34-year-old car. I was like, well, I've got to do some work to like make sure I can make the journey. But I just found myself like doing it. It wasn't even a decision. It was just like, oh, I'm just gonna like it was
once
just,
you decided to think about it, it's like you laid it out. It like, or could.
Yes, I'm realizing like I actually think it literally came down to, that was one of the first times ever in my life, if not the first time, that I literally had like multiple great options. It wasn't that I knew what I wanted and I was just kind of like lollygagging about the decision. It was like the problem there for me was I actually couldn't figure out what the best decision was. But I remember eliminating schools was not like that at all, where I would like
we joked about it.
I would, yes, I would find, well, some of the schools were bastards, but I would find myself having decided at the same moment I was pulling up my email to type out that I had decided like to go against that place. Do you know what I mean? So it was just like the moment of action and decision were kind of one there.
Yeah, rarely do I'm not sure I've ever had that experience. It's just like, I remember like for college, it was between Pitt and Hamilton. And then
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. And like,
Yeah.
I'm like, I think I visited Hamilton. I'm like, I'm going to go to Hamilton. I like it here. It wasn't like,
yeah,
it wasn't the fact that Pitt wasn't a good option. Pitt was a great option. Lots of people I know there, but it was like, this just appeals more to me. It was distinctly,
they were on different tiers. Yeah.
Or it's just one happened to appeal more to me. It wasn't like ambiguous, like, well,
Yeah.
It wasn't like vacillating back and forth, you know what I mean, between two. It was like, no, like this appeals more to me. And then I got into Cornell and it was like, no, I'll go there. So
Yeah.
it was just like,
Yeah.
so like there was no real, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just,
you know what's funny? I kind of, because I'm really trying to like deeply remember and introspect about the whole, phenomenology of like choosing. There were absolutely, this is the first time I've ever experienced this. I think it is very true to say that that was the first time ever where I had decided on Houston, and then for several days afterwards, sort of almost like double checked the other like offers or whatever, to be, you know what I mean? To be like, this is wrong, right? Because it was like, oh, I've never been in a position where I wanted to say yes to multiple things almost. Do you know what I mean? Because like I was obviously so unsatisfied in my job that like, okay, that's not like a pull, right? And the idea, like, but all of these places were like so amazing that I had to just be like, okay, can I actually say no to this? It was almost that sort of a thing.
yeah.
Which is actually, that strikes me as really odd that we're so rarely in that sort of a position.
Yeah, I'm rarely in that position where it's
yeah.
I've been in positions where there are multiple good choices, but not multiple, equally good choices.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And I think like, I mean, I talk with both of you at length, obviously, about this, but like what made it so difficult too was the fact that there were many kind of incommensurable axes for that, as sort of like, placement rate into PhD programs, specific professors, cost of living, stipend, like all of these things. It's like, okay, at what level of stipend does it like, make up for like a slightly worse placement rate or whatever? It's like, how do you weigh that?
In Sartre's quote, it's like you simply like after you make the decision, you discover that you weighed it that much, right?
Literally, like that was the experience of choose. It was like I realized that I had chosen Houston. It wasn't even like I chose Houston.
Yeah, no, 100%. I'm kind of pulled into like an economist mindset in this case, where it's like, whatever, like what they do, like that is kind of the data, right?
Yeah.
Like everything else will map back onto that, right? You need to square with that, kind of in a way.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if feel like we're kind of tapering off.
I think
definitely, yeah.
But I actually found a quote, like coincidentally, like a week ago. Like it was like in this perfectly kind of fits into the discussion. So I like this is very much about like the kind of the experience of making decisions. So I wanted to kind of read it if that's all right.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a quote by Sylvia Plath. It's from her work at the Bell Jar, but it's fitting in a couple ways. But I'll just read it. I saw my life branching out before me like the green fig tree in the story. From the tip of every branch, the fat purple fig, a wonderful future beckoned and winked. One fig was a husband and a happy home and children. Another fig, a famous poet, and another fig was a brilliant professor. And another fig was E.G., the amazing editor. And another fig was Europe and Africa and South America. And another fig was Constantine and Socrates and Attila, and a pack of other lovers with queer names and offbeat professions. And another fig was an Olympic lady crew champion. And beyond and above these figs were many more figs I couldn't quite make out. I saw myself sitting in the crotch of this fig tree, starving to death, just because I couldn't make up my mind which of the figs I would choose. I wanted each and every one of them, but choosing one meant losing all the rest. And as I sat there, unable to decide, the figs began to wrinkle and go black, and one by one they plopped to the ground at my feet.
Wow.
Very good.
That's
a great quote, right?
That's an amazing quote.
That's like, I think that kind of describes kind of like where my issue comes from, especially like the quote about like the figs you couldn't quite make out. It's like the knowledge that there are options out there that might actually like, be better than all the ones that, you were considering, like that, all of that kind of leads to great uncertainty. That's kind of like how I experience all of my life. It's like, like at some point, like if I'm making a decision, the notion that there is something out there that probably would be better. It's just like, I just don't have the information like available to me. That it's like, damn it.
Because before you know it, you don't know that like that fig is out there. Yeah. I thought that was like relevant to what we were kind of just describing with decision making in particular, big decision making. I think that's a great quote to end on. Yeah,
it's a very good one.
Yeah, I'm surprised we got as much out of this. I thought this was going to be a very short episode, but to my surprise, it's closer to 2 hours.
The narrative is short, but we can pull a lot out of it.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, to the listeners, I don't know exactly what we're doing next, but I hope you enjoyed this discussion and stay tuned for more on existentialism. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of Plato's Cave. I always enjoy discussing topics with these two guys. So if you want to support the show in any way, you can do so simply by sharing it. I'm hoping to get this show out to more people. And so if you want to share it on Twitter or social media, that would really help me. You can also rate it on Apple Podcasts. Like this video if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe via Apple Podcasts or an RSS feed. You can also discuss it on your own show and link back to my website, or you can connect me with recommended guests or topics to cover. You can get in contact with me at platoscavepodcast@gmail.com. Follow me on Twitter at Jordan_C_Myers, and I now have a website for my philosophy endeavors at jordanmyers.org. If you want to know a little bit more about me and my fellow co-hosts, as I said in the introduction, I'm a master's student in philosophy at the University of Houston. I did my undergrad at the University of Pittsburgh, where I studied mechanical engineering and philosophy, and now that I'm back at school, I'm hoping to more closely study moral responsibility, free will, ethics, epistemology, and moral psychology. Those are topics that I was introduced to and got really interested in my undergrad work. So Adam and Giffen accompanied me on this show, and Adam is one of my oldest friends. We actually met in kindergarten, and we've been interested in philosophical topics for as long as we can remember, and in a lot of ways it's been the basis of our friendship. Adam studied chemistry and biology at Cornell, and he is currently working at a law firm. And he's especially interested in moral responsibility as well, but also law, religion, and free will. Giffen is also one of my oldest friends, and we've been friends since elementary school as well. Giffen studied biology and economics at RPI, and now he works in human health research. He believes that there's very interesting overlap between both of his fields of study and philosophy, and he's particularly interested in exploring political philosophy. So this series was right up his alley. And with all of that information, again, I hope that you enjoyed this episode, and I hope that you get in contact with me or follow my work in any way that you deem reasonable to do. So with that, thank you for listening.